Hey everyone, welcome to Outside the Walls. My name is John White.
I'm Casey McDonald.
And I'm Steve Reeves.
And today we're introducing a new format for you guys. It's called Quick Questions. This is going to be a shorter episode where we address questions from our listeners. So if you have any questions, as always, you can send those to questions@wschurch.net. But today's questions that we're going to answer come from Miss Shirley Williams, and they all center around Leviticus. And so here's what Miss Shirley says. In Leviticus 12:8, why was a sin offering required when a woman gave birth? What was her sin? And her second question, in Leviticus 14:12, why was a guilt offering needed when a leper was cleansed? What was the leper guilty of? And her last question, why was atonement needed for an inanimate object such as a house in Leviticus 14? Or the holy sanctuary, the tent of meeting? I can understand the need for cleansing, but isn't atonement supposed to be for sin? We have a lot of questions surrounding these different offerings that we see in Leviticus. So what's your guys' take on this?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is recognize what the book of Leviticus is about. Of course, the book of Leviticus is the third book in the Pentateuch, the books of law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. And the book of Leviticus is talking about the holiness of God. The theme, I really believe, in the book of Leviticus is in chapter 11, verse 44, be holy, for I, the Lord, am holy. God was wanting his people to exhibit this quality of holiness. And, today I think we have a difficult time understanding what that word holy means. We hear that word used so many times today in ways that I think are just really an abomination to God. People use the word holy as an adjective and attach it to all types of ungodliness and filth and things like this. But the idea of holiness is that which is totally and completely set apart. It is not profane. It is not common. It is not ordinary. It is something that is in a category totally to itself. And this is God. God is holy in that he is in a category all to himself. There is none like him. And God wants us to exhibit this holiness in being made separate from the things of this world. And so that's the overall theme of the book of Leviticus. It's dealing with holiness in the sight of God. And that holiness takes several forms. It is found in ritual holiness. It is found in moral holiness and purity. And so some of these questions that, and by the way, Shirley is just one of my favorite people. I love Shirley so much. But I think the questions that Shirley is posing here are looking at some of the rituals within the book of Leviticus, some of the ritual impurity. And for instance, the woman, after she has given birth, well, throughout the book of Leviticus, there was a ritual impurity that came about, for instance, during the woman's menstrual period. Mm-hmm. And so also here at the birth of a child, it was not a moral sin that the woman was guilty of. This was a ritual impurity which was taken care of by a ritual cleansing as prescribed here in the book of Leviticus.
When you use this word guilt, I think a lot of times it feels like, well, that seems unfair because she didn't do anything.
Right.
There was nothing wrong that she had done. This was just simply part of being pure again in the eyes of God. It's cleansing after a completely normal thing. She wasn't guilty. There's no shame in that at all. It was just part of life. This is what God had prescribed for them to be ritually pure again. So I like you kind of distinguishing between the moral and the ritual purity there.
Yeah, there's sacrifices as you go through Leviticus that might not necessarily be tied to an individual's specific act, but rather just something that was done on a regular basis, regardless if there was sin involved. The question comes from Leviticus 12:8. She mentioned specifically in there, so it might be helpful to read the verses surrounding that to help bring it in the context. But verse 8 specifically, if she cannot afford 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. And so there's this idea that since she's offering a sin offering, that she has committed a sin. And basically what we're discussing is the distinction between her not necessarily committing a sin in this birth of a child, but rather this ritual uncleanness that this offering would take care of.
Correct.
Right. And I think maybe that's the hang up is you hear the word sin and we kind of identify that with a moral failing. That's the connection that we make in our culture. Is sin is like you did something wrong. You willingly, went against God's will, or you did something that you need to make some sort of sacrifice for, you need to deal with. But that's not entirely what Jewish culture was about during this time. It's not what Levitical law is necessarily always about. There were definitely situations where you would offer those things to deal with a sin that you had committed, but the reality is not so much to erase the past or to deal with, the sin in your past, but to deal with the fact that because of that sin, you are now impure and needs to be purified. So you could be impure for a lot of different reasons.
Right. Sure. And the Jewish people were commanded to offer so many sacrifices. If you want to get confused in a hurry, just as you read through the book of Leviticus, consider all the different sacrifices. You had the animal sacrifices, and you had sacrifices that were to be offered on a daily basis, even, whether it be in the morning at 9 or at 3 in the afternoon, the third hour or the 12th hour, no, the 9th hour, excuse me. So you had all of these. You had animal sacrifices, but not just animal sacrifices. You had grain sacrifices. You had meal sacrifices. You had wave offerings. I mean, all different types of sacrifices that are spelled out for different things here within the book of Leviticus. And so some of these were, in fact, for the ritual impurity that came about, whether it was with childbirth or with the menstrual period or whatever it might have been, that could bring ritual impurity.
As I study through the book of Leviticus, the thing that comes to the top of my mind every time is, I am so thankful that Jesus came to wash away my sins.
Yes.
As I study through this book, I'm thinking, there's no way that all these things could be kept. And I think that might have been part of the point that God was making. Like, everything that would be necessary for you to be holy is impossible for you to do. Like, there's absolutely no way that you can do this. Whenever I was in college, of course, a lot of things have changed surrounding social clubs in the last 15 years or so. But decades ago, whenever there was this pledging process, the idea behind the club that was taking on new guys was to make it seem like it would be impossible to join this club. And kind of the intention behind the club that I was in was give them all these crazy assignments, make them do all these things, and the number of things that they had to do, there wasn't enough hours in the day to get done. And the idea was to frustrate them. The idea was to get them flustered to the point where they think there's no way that this is possible. And come Friday night, the big reveal was, yeah, you're right. There's absolutely no way that you could do this. And the only way that we have any chance at making it into the kingdom of God is through the grace of Jesus. And the only way that you can get into this club is through similar grace. There's no way that you can do this, and none of us are worthy to be in this club. And that's kind of the way that I look at Leviticus. No Jew is worthy to be in the club. There's nothing that they could do, and I think that was the whole message of Christ. There is nothing that you could do. No man could follow this to the T except for Jesus, and he died, paid the ultimate sacrifice for us. And I think that kind of goes into all these different sacrifices that is commanded through the Old Testament, is to make us realize you're not good enough and you're never going to be good enough.
Yeah, you cannot make it on your own.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right.
Well, in reference to the house as well, because she mentions Leviticus 14 when dealing with the subject of leprosy. Again, this is not because the leper did something wrong or because the house did anything wrong. Right. Mm-hmm. It's just, again, it's part of this ritual cleansing. Like, yay, we're glad your leprosy is gone. Here's the purification ritual that you need to go through. And so we probably just getting a little hung up there on some of the language.
Now in some of the laws that were given to the Jewish people, like with leprosy, for instance, there were valid medical reasons for some of those laws. A leper was considered unclean because of the highly contagious nature of leprosy. Were he to remain within the population, generally, he could have contaminated others. So by being declared unclean, he was separated from others to reduce the risk of the spread of leprosy. And only after he had been pronounced cleansed by the priest was he able to then rejoin his family. You might want to consult Luke chapter 17, where Jesus healed the 10 lepers. And you might remember he told them to go show themselves to the priest that they might be made clean or pronounced clean. And as they were going, they were cleansed. But only one of them actually came back to thank Jesus. And Jesus asked, "Where are the 9? Were there not 10 cleansed?" So there were at times valid medical reasons for some of the ritual laws that we find in the old in Judaism.
Yeah. Yeah, and there, this idea of a guilt offering when it comes to a leper over in Leviticus 14, there was some legitimacy to if there was some sort of disease imposed on an individual that something they had done wrong had brought this on. This idea of, I believe it's called retribution theory. The concept that the 3 friends of Job had, that Job, obviously you've done something wrong right. to have all these things happen to you. And so because of that wrong, you need to, basically make it right. And so the reason that was a very prevalent mindset was, I think, in large part, a lot of it was justified. Somebody had done something wrong, and so a disease had been brought on this person or a large group of people, and so this idea of leprosy in the camp, it may have been a large portion of the time disease like that amongst Jewish people may have been because they weren't following the laws that they were supposed to be following, and so disease was acquired, whether through the uncleanness that they had been practicing or God imposing this leprosy on them. And so this idea of needing a guilt offering could be very much tied to that, even though that wasn't necessarily 100% of the time the case. Like Job would be the exception to that, where Job was sinless. He hadn't done anything to bring this on himself, and he said, I'm not. His friends were trying to convince him otherwise, but Job said, no, I haven't done anything wrong. There's no need for me to try and get atonement, in other words.
I think we need to clarify also the word atonement. The word atonement does not merely mean forgiveness, but it does mean cleansing. When something was considered to be unclean, there were 2 things that it needed. It needed, first of all, atonement. That was, it needed to be cleansed. And that was done through sacrifice. The second thing it needed was to be sanctified. And that was done by offering it to God in one of several ways. It could have been done by pouring oil upon it. It could have been done by holding it up before the Lord and dedicating it to God. It's really interesting because that's what you and I need in our lives. We need those same two things. We need both atonement, the cleansing that comes about, in our case, through the blood of Christ, and we need sanctification. That is, we need to be consecrated, and that is what comes about in the transformation of our lives when we become Christians. We both have atonement for sin, and we are sanctified. We are set apart for use to God.
Yeah, and that word atonement, at least in our English language, I've heard it kind of broken down to help understand, I guess, the English ear, atonement, at one-ment. And so, making something at one with God. And even if it is an inanimate object, like was mentioned in that third question there, like a house or something along those lines, the sanctuary tent of meeting, the altar, these inanimate things that, they obviously can't sin. They don't necessarily need atonement, but it's a matter of bringing things, whether they're people or inanimate objects, in line with the holiness of God.
Yeah, maybe you could use the word alignment as well. It's more bringing things into a holy state, preparing them for being right with God again.
Right. And even an inanimate object, if it were to come in contact with that which was unclean, it would then be rendered unclean, not because it had done anything, obviously, but simply its association with that which was unclean. It would be made unclean.
Well, I don't have anything else to add unless you guys do.
Thank you so much for offering those questions. And again, if you have any others, we do have some more kind of on the docket that will come back to this format eventually. So look forward to that. So keep on pumping those questions to us.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Shirley, for sending us those questions in. We hope you guys have enjoyed this quick questions, and we hope you have an awesome day.